guys! In this video, we're going to focus on the internet linguistics of vines and the way in which vines can be utilized to express racial humor. We're actually going to build this entire discussion off a thesis called What? A Black Man Can't Have a TV? Vine Racial Comedy as a Socio-Political Discourse Genre. This piece was written by Dr. Kendra Calhoun as her thesis at UC Santa Barbara in 2016. And one of the reasons we're going to build our knowledge of vines from this article is that Dr. Calhoun used discourse analysis in her study of vines. And so we can use our exploration of her work to learn more about how discourse analysis is conducted on internet languages. I also think it's great to reference somebody's thesis work because while Dr. Calhoun has many other publications since her thesis, if any of you are watching this video who may be interested in one day pursuing a master's degree, you can see how in-depth a thesis is, as well as how fun and interesting writing a thesis can be. We're not going to learn everything about discourse analysis from this review of her thesis, but once we get to her methodology and review how she handled her data, you'll see a glimpse of discourse analysis that we haven't addressed in any of our other videos thus far. Again, to clarify real quick, I'm presenting to you a lot of Dr. Calhoun's thesis research. Not all of it, but a bit of it. So I want to stress giving her the credit for her work and her analysis on this particular topic. I also want to acknowledge that she quotes a lot of amazing scholars in her work, especially in her literature review. So I'm going to provide you a link to Dr. Calhoun's thesis below in the description of this video, and I encourage you to take a look at it when you have time. Okay, let's get on with our investigation of racial humor in vines. Some of you may be asking yourself, what are vines? And that's a fair question because the term actually comes from the name of a social media platform that only existed between 2012 and 2017. And towards the end of its existence was replaced by competing apps such as Snapchat. So Vine was a video sharing social media platform that allowed you to share 6-second video clips. It is a form of microblogging, and microblogging is posting short, frequent posts to a site, which is different from a blog, which involves posting really long posts. Like Vine, Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and the like are all microblogging platforms. So Vine, again, was a video sharing platform, and while it wasn't identical to Snapchat or TikTok, those are probably the most similar apps we have to it this day. So internet famous, probably a phrase you've heard before. It is a person who has acquired their fame through the internet. So this would be different than someone who became famous in Hollywood for films they've made, who then decided to join Twitter. Internet famous people are those who got the start of their fame from their social media use. Social media platforms like Vine tend to favor people who don't come from traditional celebrity systems. That system includes Hollywood. On Vine especially, people preferred to follow grassroots micro-celebrities. So in other words, people that were just regular people like you and me, people who were relatable. And some of those relatable people have gone on to become internet famous in Vine and beyond, such as Zach King, who used Vine to create really awesome illusion tricks, such as these vines.
Does anyone else have chicklophobia? The irrational fear that when you crack an egg...
We're magazine shopping.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, nice.
What? Whoa!
Yeah.
A little computer magic.
And Thomas Sanders, famous for his storytime narrations such as these vines.
Storytime. He was very handsome, and all the ladies that looked at him fell in love. The guy that was walking him was okay. Storytime. She only had one plan for this new year. World domination. Storytime. They were having a lovely time, and then all of a sudden a duck flew above them, and it was beautiful and majestic.
Vine was a platform that allowed regular people like you and me to express ideas and share information. So Vine was unique because it brought to the table what wasn't yet available on platforms like Twitter, which was the use of video. To put it more simply, the video feature of Vine allowed for Zach King to present his illusions and magic in a way that couldn't be expressed on platforms that only allowed for still images or text. What we're highlighting here is referred to as technological affordances. The shortest, simplest definition of this term I can offer is that these are the way a platform allows and restricts content production, such as their allowance and their restrictions on text, images, and audio. For example, Twitter has a text character limit, so every post has to fit within that affordance, within that parameter. And the person tweeting has to think carefully and intentionally about this affordance and make narrative decisions that allow them to communicate their message while staying within this character parameter. The searchable hashtag feature found on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, which we just covered in a prior video, is also an example of a technological affordance. And we saw in our prior video that people can use hashtags to promote causes, also known as hashtag activism. So we know that if we're going to raise our voices for a cause, that platforms that allow for hashtagging, platforms that have the technical affordance of hashtagging, are going to be more suited for helping spread discourse on social issues. Because we also know that people can click on them and be taken to discourse surrounding the cause. Emojis and typological tone of voice features, which we covered in other videos, are also examples of affordances in e-languages. Also, hyperlinks are another example of a technological affordance. So whether or not the platform even allows you to share links, and then whether or not those platforms allow you to hyperlink those links to text, or if you have to just copy and paste the whole link. It is actually affordances like these, and the fact that a lot of these are shared features across social media platforms, that have paved the way for patterns of discourse that are distinct to e-languages, such as GIFs or GIFs, however you want to pronounce them, which stands for Graphics Interchain Format. These are 1 to 5 second video clips that look more like images that loop or play repeatedly. There is no audio to them, only the image, and since there is no audio, the speech for the GIF is superimposed as text, like subtitling around the image. We can see GIFs used primarily as reaction responses, such as my reaction or how I feel when X happens, like this stilled image of a GIF that reads, my reaction when I hear K-pop. However, since the use of GIFs has become so widespread, people now no longer need to include the textual explanation or textual disclaimer for the GIF to make sense, for it to achieve the intended message and purpose. Now we can just post the looping image, and the expression or body language in the GIF does all the communication for us without the text. GIFs have a unique ability to capture and isolate bodily gesture, bringing the meanings otherwise carried so powerfully through bodily actions and face-to-face communication back into what is otherwise a text-based mode of communication. So put shortly, GIFs bring body language to e-language. So the ability to isolate video clips and loop them is a technological affordance of GIFs. But back to Vine, Vine had the affordance of video, which is what at the time made it different than other social media platforms. Video clips could be 6 seconds long, and the affordance of video meant that creators had choices to make in terms of special effects, like filters that they could apply, or had to make choices with things like costumes and setting. Since the platform had the affordance of audio, people had to make choices about music and narration and scripts. Another affordance was text. So here people had to make choices about the title of their piece and if they wanted subtitling or a description for their video. And alongside their text, they had to make choices about what was going to be text versus what was going to be audio, such as something in their audio script versus something in their video text description. Vine also had the affordance of emojis, which, as you know, can influence the tone of a message. People could use hashtags such as hashtag TBT, meaning Throwback Thursday, to index their posting and give it context. So all in all, there were a lot of technological affordances to consider, and these ultimately set the boundaries and the rules of discourse in this media space. In fact, Viners had to know how to navigate these affordances. They had to have production knowledge unique to Vine in order to compress a message into 6 seconds, which of course is going to follow different production rules than having an unlimited amount of video time and textual space, or the production rules of other social media platforms like Twitter or Facebook. So having a better understanding of these technological affordances and the discourse of vines, we can jump into our main person of interest today, and that is Andrew Batchelor, known better as King Batch. Now, at the time that Dr. Calhoun completed her thesis, King Batch was the most followed Viner on Vine. His Vines were particularly interesting because he had the ability to share socio-political ideologies alongside comedy and humor, which is formally known as socio-political humor. And he did all this quite successfully within the constraints of Vine's technological affordances. We'll jump into a definition of socio-political humor in just a second, but first let's take a quick look at a few examples of King Batch's work.
What are you doing?
What, a black man can't have a TV?
No, you can be black and have a TV.
Yeah. We're gonna put these masks on because it's cold out.
Yeah, for sure.
I made it out the hood, baby.
Welcome back.
You know, some nights you just need to go outside and go right back in. Nighttime ain't the time to be playing. Go.
For the next 12 hours, all crime is legal.
Today's a good day.
So let's now look at what we mean by socio-political humor. Socio-political ideologies include historical, social, and political ideas that surround socio-cultural differences such as gender, religion, nationality, and race. So socio-political humor is humor that makes fun of these ideas and ideologies. And there are two types. First, there is hegemonic socio-political comedy. And this is humor that favors the status quo. So this type of humor promotes stereotypes of marginalized people groups. This doesn't only have to do with race, but we'll focus on that as part of our investigation in this video. So an example of hegemonic socio-political comedy would be the presentation of the Latina housekeeper on the show Family Guy, who is always portrayed as having a limited English proficiency. So this type of socio-political comedy reinforces the stereotype of Hispanics not being competent in the English language. This humor favors the status quo, meaning it favors ideas in our society about this particular minority group. Conversely, we have anti-hegemonic humor, socio-political comedy, which contradicts or complicates hegemonic stereotypes by constructing alternative narratives. Basically, they're calling out the majority by highlighting the other side of the conversation, all under the mask of comedy. And again, we're focusing on race. So in regards to race, we've traditionally seen this type of humor in Black stand-up comedians and on shows like The Chappelle Show and Key and Peele. People who use anti-hegemonic socio-political comedy to represent minority groups and challenge the misled ideologies in our society. And what our author, Dr. Calhoun, wanted to investigate is how this type of comedy is used in King Batch work on Vine. So Dr. Calhoun wanted to explore King Batch's use of socio-political comedy on Vine, which is referred to as Vine racial comedy, a unique genre of racial humor that had emerged on Vine. To do this, she collected a data set of 30 of King Batch's Vines, all of which engaged in humor around race and ethnicity. Dr. Calhoun wanted to explore how King Batch was able to use Vine as a medium of expressing and challenging socio-political ideologies, because given the affordances of Vine, the technological affordances, King Batch's methods would be quite different than the methods that could be used by stand-up comedians or skit shows like Key and Peele. So in order to be able to see these complexities and to understand how King Batch was able to achieve this message inside the context of Vine, part of Dr. Calhoun's work involved performing a discourse analysis. So we've alluded to discourse analysis in other videos, and we've even practiced a little discourse analysis in an assignment on hashtag Black Lives Matter. But now we're going to see a little more of the methodology that goes into analyzing language in context. So a discourse analysis is a thorough exploration of language, context, and practice. So Calhoun began by taking detailed notes of key features following her own framework, which consisted of indexing first the metadata, so the captions, titles of the vines, any hashtags included after the title, and the date the video was posted. Secondly, she summarized the main idea or the point of the joke. Thirdly, she noted the linguistic features such as the speaker's dialects, use of slang, and etc. And fourthly, she looked at relevant effects of editing or video effects such as background music or costume changes. She also noted the characters and their roles in each vine, taking note of the demographic information, the roles they played, such as a cop or a friend, and whether or not characters were based on racial or social stereotypes. Now, because the study included audio-visual data rather than just audio data, which would be like listening to an audio recording only, she also had to note and transcribe non-speech features, which included non-linguistic features such as body movement, facial expressions, and hand gestures, and features that were unique to the storytelling or context, such as costume, background scenery, and scene changes. In addition to all the aforementioned items, she then had to transcribe the oral data, so the speech. Now, transcribing speech for a discourse analysis doesn't mean we just write out what someone has said. So, for example, a transcription of a line from one of King Batch's videos would not simply be, "What, a black man can't have a TV?" That's only the start, because there's so much more to speech than just what is said. How it is said is also important. So we want to be able to transcribe the tone, stress, and pitch, for example. To do this, she utilized some pretty standard transcription conventions in linguistics by Dubois and company. And these transcription conventions allowed her to really investigate the oral speech. So in using these transcription methods, now we have, "What, a black man can't have a TV?" Which is much different than, "What, a black man can't have a TV?" So let's take a look at an example of one of her transcriptions following all the data handling methodology we just reviewed. So we're going to look at the vine "Getting Out of Situations Using the Race Card." And we can see that she has taken note of the metadata at the top and proceeds to break down the initial frames of the clip following her framework. She notes the speaker's initials in the second column, and in the third column, she explores the scene's context. She notes that there are 2 white police officers standing in a parking lot outside of a building, and also 2 black men carrying a television out of the building into the parking lot, wearing t-shirts and shorts. She then notes that one of the characters points, so again, gesture, to 2 other characters and says, "What are you doing?" And notice specifically that she transcribes the speech to say, "What are you doing?" and not, "What are you doing?" And this distinction is important for those that really want to explore language and context, because the creator of this clip, King Batch, intentionally scripted this line to read a certain way. The 2 characters then stop walking and the camera does a close-up on angry faces. Okay, so let's now refer to the actual clip and see how this transcription matches up.
What are you doing?
What, a black man can't have a TV?
No, you can be black and have a TV.
He's gonna put his mask on because it's cold out.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, we're going to watch it again, but this time I'm only going to let you watch the part that aligns with this first part of the transcription.
What are you doing?
It is interesting to see how much transcription has to go into analyzing just 1 second of an 8-second clip in order to serve Dr. Calhoun in her research objective. I also want to highlight her transcription of the actor saying, "What are you doing?" because you can see that she worked to accurately reflect the dialect that the actor chose to use. Because in discourse analysis, these types of details cannot be overlooked. So you're going to see us talk about that point again a little later on. We then get the later half of her transcription and see just as much detail in her analysis of this particular Vine clip. And Dr. Calhoun actually had to do a detailed transcription like this one for each of the 30 Vines she reviewed. So I'm going to let the Vine clip play on repeat 3 times so you can see the Vine alongside Dr. Calhoun's detailed transcription of the data.
What are you doing?
What, a black man can't have a TV?
No, you can be black and have a TV.
He's gonna put his mask on because it's cold out.
Yeah, for sure. What are you doing?
What, a black man can't have a TV?
No, you can be black and have a TV.
He's gonna put his mask on because it's cold out.
Yeah, for sure. What are you doing?
What, a black man can't have a TV?
No, you can be black and have a TV.
He's gonna put his mask on because it's cold out.
Yeah, for sure.
So what does a discourse analysis tell us about how King Batch's comedy aligns with socio-political humor? Well, actually a lot, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to highlight a few features here. But I encourage you to read her more in-depth summary in her thesis of this particular Vine, because she talks about a lot more features than I can cover in this video. But let's highlight some interesting ones. So Again, Dr. Calhoun's goal was to investigate how King Batch's Vine racial comedy reflected socio-political humor, and how he used this unique discourse space to accomplish that. From the video we reviewed together, we can see that King Batch is addressing several key social issues in this short clip. Their primary themes being the racial profiling and targeting of Black men by police. As viewers, we can identify this issue immediately in the setup where the police officer immediately questions the Black men on what they are doing with the TV. The officers seemingly hold a position of authority in this exchange, both in that they are white and in uniform. It is interesting, though, to note that some of this authority is challenged or stripped away as the officer utters, "What are you doing?" in a Southern dialect. Recall how the white cop said, "What are you doing?" in a twangy Southern voice. This is actually a crucial element of that character's portrayal of a white Southern cop, because it plays into the ideologies of, first, cops being white, and secondly, the ideologies of Southern speakers of English sounding slower or dumb. So while the cops are in positions of authority, that authority is mocked by the way these cops speak. King Batch titled this video as "Getting Out of Situations Using the Race Card." The title of this piece immediately adds context to the Black man's reaction, "What, a Black man can't have a TV?" which performs the speech act of questioning and challenging the cops' implied accusations. The cops react to this challenge in a way that reflects society's socio-cultural discomfort with racial conversations and racial topics. In addition to the cops feeling foolish, the cops then attempt to play it cool and distance themselves from perceptions of racial profiling as reflected in their speech and agreeability in the rest of the clip. So the way the cops are positioned in the story is what reflects this piece as an anti-hegemonic humor, in that the cops in their actions portray under-questioned ideologies on majority groups, in this case, white people. We also see in this same piece how King Batch incorporates hegemonic humor in the same video. So on the one hand, the video explicitly makes fun of the authority of cops and white people, which is anti-hegemonic humor, but at the same time plays into hegemonic humor that reflects ideologies in society about minorities by playing the race card to get ahead in life, and the fact that in the end, the two men were actually stealing the TV. This intensive study of King Batch's work highlighted a few important takeaways, one of which is that his work demonstrates the ability to use online spaces as a way to highlight social issues that are not necessarily accurately and adequately covered in mainstream media. And we saw this also in our video on #activism, which served a similar purpose. Also, compared to #activism, we know that social media is a platform that hears all voices and that represents marginalized groups of people that are not often equally represented in mainstream media. So social media provides that platform for these topics to be addressed. An analysis of King Batch's comedy also shows that technology's role in reiterating tropes of Blackness in the cultural arena is now being critiqued by Black people themselves, who are using social media to destabilize these tropes and insert their own narratives, very often through humor. Fine racial comedy utilizes performance to give voices to ongoing racial issues and creates an easily accessible cultural forum for initiating dialogue. Again, I want to ensure that the credit regarding this presentation is given to Dr. Kendra Calhoun. This presentation was really just a simplified review of this topic and also of her thesis. So again, if you're interested in learning more, be sure to check out her thesis by going to the link below in the video. Until next time.